She never made it home. The radio cut to static. Sara's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She hadn't touched the radio. She was almost certain she hadn't touched the radio. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. Outside, the highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon someone had unrolled across the earth and forgotten about. No streetlights, no other cars. Just her headlights pushing a small, weak circle of yellow into all that darkness. And beyond that circle, nothing. She reached over and pressed the radio's power button. It stayed on. She pressed it again, held it down for 3 full seconds. The static hummed. Okay, she thought. Okay. It's just a weird electrical thing. Old car, old wiring. She'd been meaning to get it looked at for months. This was simply the universe collecting on that debt, and the universe had terrible timing. Sara exhaled slowly and focused on the road. She had about 90 minutes left to drive before she hit city limits. 90 minutes of this highway, this dark, this silence. Except it wasn't quite silence anymore, was it? The static had a texture to it, a warmth. It almost sounded like breathing if you listened long enough. So she decided very firmly that she would stop listening.
She'd left Nani's village later than planned. Her grandmother had insisted on feeding her dinner, then insisted on packing leftovers, then stood in the doorway of her little stone house and held Sara's face in both hands, and looked at her the way old people sometimes look at you, like they're memorizing you for something. "Drive carefully on that road," Nani had said.
I always do.
"I know you do, John. Drive carefully anyway." Sara had laughed it off. Now, alone on the highway with a radio that had developed opinions of its own, she thought about her grandmother's eyes, that particular look. She turned it over in her mind like a stone, looking for what she might have missed. The static shifted. Not louder, exactly, just different. Like someone adjusting a dial by a single millimeter. Sara's eyes flicked to the radio display. The digital numbers were cycling slowly, scanning through frequencies, though her hand was on the steering wheel and not anywhere near the tuner. Then it stopped. 89.6 FM. She had never heard of a station at 89.6. She drove this highway 4 or 5 times a year, and she'd scrolled through every frequency out of boredom on a dozen late-night drives just like this one. There was nothing at 89.6. There had never been anything at 89.6. The static thinned, and a voice came through. It was a man's voice. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who had nowhere to be and all night to get there. A radio voice, technically perfect. Warm in the way that things can be warm without actually caring about you.
"Good evening," he said. "You're listening to The Night Road. I'm glad you found us. Or perhaps we found you." A soft sound followed that might have been a chuckle. Sara's first instinct was relief, an actual station, an actual human voice. Her second instinct, arriving about 2 seconds behind the first, was that something about the voice was wrong in a way she couldn't immediately name. Not threatening, not cruel, just slightly off. The way a photograph of someone you love looks wrong when the contrast is turned up too high. Still recognizable, still familiar, and yet. "Tonight," the voice continued, "we have a story for you,
A real one. The best kind. Sure you do, Sara muttered. She should turn it off. She knew she should turn it off. But the alternative was silence. And the silence on this highway had started to feel less like the absence of sound and more like the presence of something that hadn't spoken yet. She left the radio on. Our story tonight is about a young woman, the host said. She's been visiting family, someone older, someone she loves, and now she's driving home alone, late, the way you do when you've stayed too long because leaving felt wrong, but staying forever wasn't an option either. Sara's jaw tightened slightly.
It was a common enough setup for a horror story. Lonely woman, isolated road. The genre practically required it. She's tired, the voice continued, but not sleepy. There's a difference, isn't there? Tired is in the bones. Tired is the kind of thing a single night of sleep won't fix. She's been carrying something for a while now, our girl. Something she doesn't have a name for yet. Sara reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror. Force of habit. The road behind her was empty. She drove. The host told his story the way someone might describe a dream, not linearly, but in layers, circling the important parts without quite landing on them. He talked about the road. He described the way a highway looks at night when you're the only person on it, how the darkness past the tree line isn't one darkness but several, how the headlights don't so much illuminate the road as they remind you how much they're failing to illuminate. Sara found herself nodding along despite herself. He was good. Whoever this was, whatever this station was, he was genuinely good at this. Her phone showed no signal. She'd noticed that about 20 minutes back. It happened on this stretch of road sometimes, a dead zone that swallowed about 15 kilometers of coverage and spat you out the other side. She wasn't worried. Not yet. She checks her phone, the host said. Sara looked down at her phone in the cup holder. No signal. Screen dark. Nothing there, he said. Of course. There's never anything there on this part of the road. She already knew that. She knows this drive. She's done it before. She set the phone back down. Her hands felt strange on the wheel. Not shaking. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. Not the kind of scared that shows up in your hands, but aware of themselves in a way hands usually aren't. She's starting to pay closer attention now, the host said, and there was something in his tone that she couldn't quite categorize. Not amusement, something quieter. She's a smart girl, always has been. She notices things. Sara turned the volume down one click. She turned the volume down, the host said immediately. She does that. When something makes her uncomfortable, she reduces it rather than removing it. She'll think about why later. The car felt very small suddenly. Sara sat absolutely still for the length of 3 road markers flashing past in her headlights, and then very carefully, very deliberately, she turned the volume back up. Because she needed to hear this now. She needed to hear every word. There's a rest stop coming up in about 4 minutes, the host said. On the left. She's passed it before without stopping. Tonight, I think she'll slow down when she sees it. Sara watched the road. 2 minutes passed. 3. The rest stop appeared on the left. A small gravel turnoff, a concrete shelter, a single flickering light above a water tap. She had passed it a dozen times without a second thought. Her foot moved to the brake. She caught herself, pulled her foot back, kept driving. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. She didn't stop, the host said, and she could hear the smile in it, gentle and terrible. Good girl. Who are you? Sara said out loud. Her voice came out steadier than she expected.
What is this? The static rose briefly, like a sigh. Keep driving, the host said. We're getting to the good part. She thought about turning the radio off, actually turning it off, not just pressing the button that had already proven it had no interest in her opinion, pulling the fuse, ripping the thing out of the dashboard, throwing it into the back seat. She thought about it the way you think about jumping when you're standing on a high ledge, not because you want to, but because your brain offers it as an option and waits to see what you do with the offering.
She kept driving. The woman in our story, the host continued, his voice settling back into that calm narrative register, has started to notice something. A small thing. The kind of small thing that shouldn't matter. The road ahead of her looks familiar. Not just familiar the way a road you've driven before looks familiar. Familiar the way a dream looks familiar. The specific angle of those trees, that particular crack running across the left lane. She's seen it before. Not in the way that she's driven this road before. Sarah's eyes were on the road. That crack. She knew that crack. She had looked at that specific crack before, tonight, and she had thought. She couldn't remember what she had thought. She can't quite remember, the host said softly. She'll try. She always tries. That's one of the things I've always... He paused. Just a beat. Just one breath length of silence. That's one of the things about her, he finished. The static swelled, and under it, just barely, Sara heard something that made the back of her neck go cold. It was music. Faint, distant, playing beneath the static like something heard through a wall. It was the song she'd been humming to herself 20 minutes ago. Sarah's humming stopped. She hadn't realized she'd started again. That was the thing. She never realized when she started. It was a habit she'd had since childhood, filling silence with sound without meaning to, her brain producing melody the way lungs produce breath. Automatic, unconscious, private. Nobody knew she did that. Not her friends, not her ex, not anyone she'd ever shared a car with, because she only did it when she was completely alone. And she was always slightly embarrassed when she caught herself, the way you're embarrassed by the things you do when you're sure no one is watching. The song playing beneath the static was the exact melody she'd been humming. Not a similar song, not a song that happened to share a few notes. The same melodic phrase, the same rhythm, the same place where she always slightly rushed the third beat because she'd never been able to keep perfect time. Her foot was pressing the accelerator harder. She didn't tell it to. She's speeding up, the host noted, conversationally, the way a sports commentator describes a play that's already in motion. That's understandable. The instinct when something feels wrong is to move faster, to outrun it. It doesn't work, but the instinct is very human, and she shouldn't be ashamed of it. Stop, Sara said. She's talking to the radio now. I said, stop. Her voice cracked slightly on the second word. She doesn't like being observed. Most people don't, even when they tell themselves otherwise. There's a particular kind of violation in being seen clearly, isn't there? Not just looked at, actually seen. She's feeling that right now, that specific discomfort. Sara grabbed the radio with her right hand and pulled. The housing was cheap plastic and old, and for a moment she thought it might actually come free, but the wiring held, and all she managed to do was scratch her palm on the corner of the panel. The voice didn't interrupt. It waited, politely, while she tried to rip the radio out of her own dashboard. She tried that, the host said, when she gave up and put both hands back on the wheel. It won't come out that way. She'll remember that in a moment. Sara blinked. She'll remember that. Not she'll figure that out. Not she'll realize that. He said, remember.
and the word landed in her chest like a coin dropped into deep water. Gone immediately, but you heard it hit. "What did you just say?" she whispered. "I said she'll remember," the host replied, "because she's done this before. She sat in this exact seat, on this exact stretch of road, at 11:47 p.m. Always 11:47. Have you noticed the clock hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes? And she's grabbed the radio housing in exactly that way, and she scraped her palm on exactly that corner." Sara looked at the dashboard clock. 11:47. She looked at her palm, a thin red line across the meat of her hand, already starting to sting. She looked back at the clock. 11:47. How many times? She heard herself ask. The host was quiet for a moment, just long enough that she thought he might not answer. "That," he said finally, "is the question, isn't it?" The static thickened and thinned in waves, and Sara drove, because what else do? You drive. The road is in front of you, and your hands are on the wheel, and your foot is on the accelerator, and you drive. Because the alternative is stopping. And something in her understood, not thought, not reasoned, but understood, bone deep, that stopping was not an option. She had tried stopping. She had a feeling she had tried it more than once. "Let me tell you what she knows," the host said, slipping back into his narrative voice, and Sara realized with a distant, almost academic horror that she found the storytelling mode less frightening than the direct address. He was using that. He knew she found it less frightening, and he was giving it to her like water to someone thirsty, measured and deliberate. She knows this road. She knows the rest stop at the 4-minute mark. She knows the crack in the left lane. She knows the exact stretch where her phone signal dies. She knows all of this, not because she's driven it before, though she has, but because something in her has retained the shape of this night, the way a piece of paper retains the crease after you've folded it. Sara's eyes were burning. She hadn't blinked in a long time. "She's been here before," the host said. "Many times. She drives. She notices the radio. She listens. She figures it out, or starts to. And then the road resets, and she's back at the beginning, and the clock reads 11:47, and her grandmother's leftovers are in the back seat getting cold. And she doesn't remember. She never remembers. Until she does. Until something cracks open just enough to let a little light through." "The song," Sara said suddenly. "Yes. I was humming it at the beginning, at the very beginning of the drive, right after I left Nani's." She was working it out as she spoke, her voice thin and rapid. "And it ended up on the radio. But it ended up on the radio before I noticed I was humming it, which means the recording came first," the host said gently. The words rearranged themselves in her head. The recording came first. "This is a recording," she said slowly. "Yes. This whole, your voice, the story, all of it? Yes. You're not live." She said it carefully, the way you place a foot on ice you're not sure will hold. "There's no studio. There's no host. There's no station at 89.6 FM. There never was." "There's no station at 89.6 FM, the voice agreed. "Then who?" She stopped. The static rolled through the speakers, soft and patient, and beneath it that melody played. And Sara's mouth went dry, because she recognized the melody. She had always recognized the melody. But she recognized something else about it now. The voice humming it, It was hers, not similar to hers, not a voice that happened to sound like hers. Her voice, with the specific, slightly hoarse quality it got late at night, with the way she breathed through her nose between phrases, with that small, almost inaudible sound she made at the end of each repetition. Her voice, on the radio, humming a song she had only ever hummed alone. "No," she said, flat, reflexive. "She's realizing it," the host said, and the host's voice cracked fractionally on the word realizing, and Sara heard it. She absolutely heard it, the tiny fault line running through the syllables, and the fault line sounded like, "Stop," she whispered. "She's asking me to stop. Stop talking." I know. I always asked myself to stop at this point. It doesn't help. The static surged. "I'm you, Sara." The road stretched ahead, unchanging. This recording, me, this voice, this story, I made it. You made it. In a previous loop, at some point, you figured out enough of what was happening to leave yourself a message. You patched it into the car radio somehow. I don't remember how. The memory doesn't carry forward. It never carries forward cleanly. And you set it to broadcast on a frequency nothing else uses, so I'd find it. So we'd find it. Sara drove. She was crying, she realized. Not dramatically, not with sobs. Just tears running down her face the way water runs down a window. Steadily, without fuss, because that's what water does. "You left yourself a breadcrumb," the voice said. Her voice said. "Because you knew you'd forget. You always forget. But you thought, I thought, that if I heard my own voice, something would stick. Something would remain after the reset, even if the memory didn't. The way you don't remember learning to walk, but your legs remember." "How do I get out?" Sara asked. The static rose and rose. "I don't know. I didn't know when I made this. I think that's why I made it. Not because I had the answer, but because I needed to stop waking up at the beginning of this road, feeling like I'd forgotten something enormous and not knowing what it was. At least this way. At least we know. At least we're not alone in it." The clock on the dashboard read 11:47.
The road began to look familiar. Not the ordinary familiar of a drive she'd taken before. The other kind. The crease in the paper kind. Ahead of her, catching in the headlights, was the crack in the left lane. She'd already passed it. She was certain she'd already passed it. She was coming up on it again. "No," she said. No, not yet." "She's almost out of time," her own voice said from the speakers, gentle and exhausted. "I was too when I made this. I could feel it coming. The reset. It feels like the moment before you fall asleep. You can't hold on to anything. Everything just... Tell me something I can keep," Sara said, urgent, leaning slightly toward the dashboard as though proximity mattered. "Tell me one thing I can keep, something that survives the reset. You said the body remembers. Tell me something my body can hold." A long pause. The static breathed. "You already know the way out," the voice said finally. "You've always known. You figured it out once, properly, all the way through. And before the loop took it, you did one thing. You recorded this. So whatever the answer is, it's not something I can say out loud. It's something you do. Look for what you do differently. Look for the thing that shouldn't be there. That's not enough.
I know. I'm sorry. I only had so much time. The crack in the road slid under her tires. The one she'd passed 3 minutes ago. The one she'd passed how many times? How many loops of this highway, this dark, this static? The clock read 11:47. Her grandmother's voice surfaced, unbidden. Drive carefully on that road. The way she'd said it, not like a standard goodbye, like a specific instruction, like someone who knew something and had decided that knowing was not the same as being able to help. Sarah's foot lifted off the accelerator. She's slowing down, her own voice observed. And now the voice sounded different, less like a recording and more like an echo. The words arriving just slightly after the actions they described, the gap between them narrowing, and Sara didn't know what that meant, but she felt it.
The rest stop appeared on the left. She had not stopped there. In every loop, she had not stopped there. She had felt the pull of it, and she had driven past because something in her understood that stopping was not safe, that stopping was the wrong move. But I never stopped, she thought, and I keep looping. So not stopping hasn't fixed anything. She turned the wheel. The car rolled onto the gravel, tires crunching, headlights sweeping across the concrete shelter and the flickering light and the water tap, and "She's stopping," her voice said from the radio, and then quieter, in a tone that Sara could only describe as startled. "She's stopped." A pause. Static. "I never stopped." Sara sat in the car with the engine idling, gravel under her tires, the highway visible through the driver's window like a screen playing a film she'd already seen too many times. She looked at the concrete shelter. The flickering light made shadows jump and settle, jump and settle. There was something on the shelter wall. She got out of the car. The night air was cold in that specific way that 3 a.m. is cold, even when the calendar says otherwise. A coldness that has less to do with temperature and more to do with the hour. She walked across the gravel and stood in front of the shelter wall and looked at what was there. Writing. Not carved or painted, written in something dark, in handwriting she recognized, would have recognized anywhere, because it was hers. "You have to call her back." That was all. 5 words in her handwriting on a rest stop wall on a highway where her phone had no signal. Sara stood there for a moment, in the cold, in the flickering light. Then she walked back to the car and sat down and picked up her phone. The screen read, "No service," same as before. She dialed her grandmother's number anyway. The phone rang. Not a failed call, not a no-service error message, not a recording about network coverage. It rang. Once. Twice. Her grandmother picked up on the 3rd ring. "John?" Nani's voice, rough with sleep. "Sara? What's wrong?" "Nothing," Sara said. Her throat was tight. "Nothing's wrong, Nani. I needed to hear your voice." A pause. Then, quietly, "You remembered." The clock on the dashboard changed. 11:48. Sara exhaled, a breath she felt like she'd been holding for longer than one night. Outside, on the highway, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. The first other car she'd seen. Coming from behind her, going the same direction, catching up slowly. Another person on the road. Just another person, going home, the same as her. She's going to be okay,
the radio said. And then, for the first time all night, it went silent. Not static silent, not the held breath silence of something waiting. Just quiet. The ordinary quiet of a car at night. Engine idling, gravel under the tires, the highway stretching ahead toward the city, and the lights, and everything that came after this. Sara put the car in drive. She did not look in the rearview mirror. She already knew the road behind her was empty.